Welcome to the Jeremy and Andy Talk Movies podcast. I am Jeremy.
I'm Andy. Another week already.
Another week. And this week we are time traveling back to the year 1999
Oh, yeah.
to revisit two of the bigger movies of the year.
Yep.
I think it's fair to say. Two gigantic box office hits. But two movies with varying degrees of reception.
Yes.
And I would say have had sort of an inverse perception over time.
Mm-hmm. And two movies that I had not watched in a really long time.
Same.
Yeah.
I don't think I realized it until I was rewatching them this week, just how long it's been.
I don't know that I had watched Phantom Menace. I'll go ahead and say that. We're doing Star Wars Episode 1, The Phantom Menace. I don't know if I've watched it in one sitting all the way through since I saw it in the theater in 1999.
Yeah, when you put it like that, one sitting all the way through, maybe once I did.
Yeah, maybe. But, I mean, it's a very small amount of times.
Yeah. I just want to tell you what a nerd I am, and also just being on vacation, that I watched. So just to give it away, we're talking about the Phantom Menace today, and the Matrix,
right.
Both of which are first installments in a trilogy, or it goes beyond that for both of them. I watched both of these movies at the beginning of the week, and I went on and watched all three prequels in the Star Wars movies, and I watched all three Matrix movies, and then even the fourth one that came out a couple of years ago. So I just re-immersed myself in this entire cinematic universe for both cases.
You really did. Holy cow. I cannot say that I did the same.
I wouldn't expect anybody else to do the same. I'm honestly kind of shocked that I did, but I think it just, again, rewatching them and realizing how long it's been and the sort of change in perspective that I can have on them, it just made me curious. Yeah. I finished Phantom Menace and I was like, okay, I can't remember Clone Wars that well, or what is it, Attack of the Clones, whatever the second one is. Yeah, I'm like, so I just kind of jumped in to start watching it, and it just kept, and I was like, okay, I'm in now. Like both cases, I was just curious to keep going.
Fair enough. Now I did spend a lot of time on YouTube watching clips of the other two Matrix movies. I didn't go with the fourth Matrix movie and the other two, Episode 2 and Episode 3 of Star Wars. So I definitely stayed in the world a little bit, just not as much as you did.
Yeah. Well, we're going to, for the purposes of this one, stick to the 1999 installments that we originally said anyway. So all of that was just for my own benefit, for my own curiosity. But let's start with The Phantom Menace. Okay. Phantom Menace was your pick, and you picked it for a very simple, practical reason.
Yeah.
And what was that?
Well, I texted you and I said, for the sake of, if we're really taking a good hard look at the 1999 movies, I think you have to give consideration to what was the highest grossing movie of 1999. And by quite a big margin, it was Star Wars Episode 1, The Phantom Menace. And honestly, it is an important movie. I think in 1999, I don't think it's an overstatement to say it was probably the most anticipated movie of all time. I think that's a fair statement. I don't know if you've thought that through or if you could counter that, but the hype around that movie was unreal. So it's an important movie to look at.
I think you're 100% right in saying that it was the most anticipated movie of all time. I mean, it was so anticipated that famously, I can't remember what the other movies were, but a couple other movies had good box office just because people bought tickets to go watch the preview for The Phantom Menace and then left. They would watch the preview, pay a full movie ticket price, and then leave.
Which is something you can't even imagine now, of course, because you would just watch it online. But yeah, that was a thing that happened. It's crazy.
Absolutely insane. So, as you said, biggest box office movie of that year. It made $924 million worldwide. Yeah. The second highest was The Sixth Sense at $672 million.
Yeah.
Third highest was Toy Story 2 at $487. So you're seeing, like, not only was it the highest,
it blew everything.
The third highest was almost half of what it was.
Yeah.
So just a massive, massive movie.
Yep, absolutely. So yeah, that was why I picked it. It's just an important movie to look at.
And I was curious to rewatch it because I said at the beginning here, the two different receptions coming out. When Phantom Menace came out, it was not very well received.
It was not.
People were like, Star Wars fans were really upset uh, and then non-Star Wars fans were like, "What is this? This is
Yeah,
strange."
it didn't feel like, in the moment, it didn't feel like it won anybody over to Star Wars who wasn't already there.
Yeah, but then as I said, over time, there's been, I don't know how long ago it was now. Time runs together. 10 years ago, it felt like there was sort of like a reclaiming of the prequels.
Oh, it was like,
A like
hey guys,
let's
yeah,
reconsider.
like we were
Yeah,
too hard on this movie. Let's give it a break.
yeah. And so I was curious. I was like, okay, maybe if I go back and rewatch it, I'll see like there was more there than I gave it credit for originally.
Hmm.
Maybe it was the victim of those super high expectations, and it was just never going to live up to that.
Right. And
So
it's kind of funny too. It kind of had this life where people started, like, I don't know if you saw any of this or online, where people would like re-edit stuff. And it was like they would make Jar Jar Binks the bad guy of the movie. And then there was like all these like conspiracies. It's like, no, Jar Jar Binks is actually, he's on the dark side and he's infiltrated the Jedi. And it kind of grew, years and years later because of the internet and people's crazy theories about Jar Jar Binks. So that was kind of funny.
absolutely. So my rewatch of it, I'm going to go ahead and just put this out there. I don't think I was missing very much
Right.
in my initial assessment
Yeah.
of it. I don't think that this is a very good movie. But what I do think is that there is a good movie somewhere in this story.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't find it and they didn't put it together in this particular iteration of it.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you want me to go ahead and say what I think rewatching it, or do you want to?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. So I agree with you. Like I rewatched it, and let me say a couple things. First and foremost, I want to get this out of the way because I was reading a lot online. This is not one of the worst movies of all time. I want to say that. Like, I don't think it's like Madam Web level bad. I don't think the movie works, but I think it's a little harsh. Some of the stuff I read online where they're like, "What an embarrassment!" Like, I didn't like it. It didn't land. The stuff I didn't like at the time, I didn't like now. It's not the worst movie I've ever seen by far. It's safe from that. Um, but yeah, it just doesn't work. And I spent the whole time I was watching it. I was focused on the movie, but I was also just trying to figure out why it doesn't work. And to me, it goes back to what you and I have talked about on here before when we talk about prequels. I just didn't I, I just didn't want to see Darth Vader from small child to Darth Vader. So just immediately I'm not invested in this story at all.
There's definitely something to knowing how everything's going to play out down the road that affects your emotional investment and your stakes in this current, prequel.
Yeah.
Um, and you're right. Like, we didn't need the Anakin backstory. Darth Vader, the mystery around him was way cooler than any backstory they were going to give him.
Yep.
And so it was probably a losing battle that they started with from the beginning.
I agree. That was one of the things I thought about while watching it. You're like, no wonder this didn't work because it was just doomed from the get go. And there's so much to talk about when you talk about Star Wars, and we've never really had like a long Star Wars conversation. But the episodes 4, 5, and 6, New Hope, Empire, Return of the Jedi, those were revered, and especially in this era. When I grew up, like, it's like we've talked about with different things before. You were just born knowing Star Wars when I was a kid. And those movies were held in such high regard. And, Darth Vader, it felt like to me pretty quickly, long before internet and, Mount Rushmores and all these different things that movie nerds do now, everyone held Darth Vader up as like, this is one of the all time great movie villains. So then you look back and you go, man, they really tried to tackle the origin of Darth Vader in this world where the original, or 4, 5, and 6 episodes, 4, 5, and 6 of Star Wars had not, they were still revered. So you have that plus trying to fill in the backstory for what was at the time, and I think what still is considered just one of the coolest villains of all time. And you just think, boy, no wonder. I was almost more surprised watching this time that we were so surprised in the moment that this movie didn't work. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I know what you mean. Um, so I guess we could have sort of the broader Star Wars conversation first. I was considering myself a Star Wars fan before this movie came out, like that original trilogy that you're
Mm-hmm.
talking about being revered. Of course, I came to it much later than,
Right.
I mean, like being born after it. But even I think I was a little older when I first saw it, as far as I was probably 10 or so
Mm-hmm.
before the first one I saw was the last one,
Return of the Jedi.
Return of the Jedi was the first one that I saw. I went to a friend's house, on VHS. He's like, "You got to see this," and show me Return of the Jedi. And then I saw it. I don't know. I can't remember. I saw it so out of order. I think
Yeah.
I went like three, one, two,
Sure.
and but I'm like, I realized as a kid, it's Star Wars is so easy to fall in love with for a couple of reasons that are very basic. Laser swords are
Yeah.
cool. The Force is
Yeah.
cool. Like being able to move things with your like. I don't know that it was all the politics and the space opera drama of it that I actually liked.
Yes.
It's just, dude, laser swords are cool.
Yeah. 100%. Laser swords are cool. The Force is cool. Darth Vader's obviously the bad guy who, he's the shadow looming over all these movies. Anytime he pops up, it's cool. And it's such a simple good guys versus bad guys story. And then, and that was another thing I really noticed, and I guess maybe I just kind of forgotten rewatching Phantom Menace. It gets so bogged down in the Jedi, in like you said, the politics and the order and the structure of this world, and that was just that was a complete bore to me this time. I was not interested in that at all, like not at all.
I did think reading the trivia, there was so many examples of George Lucas tried to get this writer to come on and write the actual screenplay from his notes, or tried to get this director to come on and direct it. Some really big names, very talented people.
Mm-hmm.
And the trivia, like over and over again, it would be their response was they didn't want to do it because they felt like George was the only guy who could actually bring his vision to life.
Yeah.
And I thought, those are really bad friends because all they actually did
Yeah.
was just leave George to his own worst impulses and
Yeah.
devices, and George ended up like not having anybody keeping him check or balancing him or saying like, "Hey man, this is maybe too much or this is too far." And George probably did bring exactly his vision to life, but it needed more collaboration. Is my only thought. Like, so he needed some people to come in and be like, maybe let's not go here. Let's maybe go there. Let's simplify. Let's do something else.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, famously, the the original trilogies, the ones that work best, are ones that aren't directed by George Lucas. Somebody else came in and it was a director that took Empire Strikes Back and made it, that darker tone and had it hit the way that people like so much. And so I'm like, man, if George Lucas, if these supposed friends of his were actually good friends, they would have come in and helped him maybe salvage this movie from being as bad as it was.
Yeah, I've heard people say before, maybe they talked about this on the rewatchables, but there's like George Lucas, he is a talented guy. And, I mean, you can't come up with Star Wars and kind of, along with Spielberg, come up with Indiana Jones and not have some talent. But they were saying, like, he's a great conceiver of ideas. But then, he, like for Indiana Jones, then he needs Spielberg to kind of rein him in and add his own touch to it. And yeah, like it's funny, like you watch this movie and it really shows no as a director, he really shows no talent. There's nothing unique or interesting about the way this movie is directed at all.
It's very clear that Lucas is a creative mind.
Yep.
You get the idea that he was probably a loner growing up,
Sure.
spent a lot of time in his room, kind of crafting ideas and
Yeah.
stories, and that comes through in the way that he has a really hard time writing interactions.
It's rough, and it actually, I know you can probably attest this because you watched the other two prequels. His dialogue and his interactions are brutal. They are brutal. When the movies go on, like episode 2 and 3, the Hayden Christensen, Natalie Portman stuff, you just want to cover your eyes and your ears and turn your head away because it is just brutal.
It definitely has the feel of guy who grew up playing Dungeons and Dragons and never actually talked to a girl, trying to craft what he thinks a great love story conversation sounds like.
It's really bad. Yeah, it's bad. And then too, like, I don't want to jump ahead of you. You're the pilot of the ship, but like
Go ahead.
it is almost like a cliche at this point to make fun of Jar Jar Binks and talk about how stupid that is. So I tried really hard to watch this with no like Jar Jar Binks prejudice. That's such a terrible character. It is really bad. And it was like Lucas, it almost feels to me like he knew somewhere in the back of his mind that Jar Jar Binks was a bad character. But to reinforce his own mind, he just was like, no, we're just going to shove Jar Jar Binks down everybody's throat. And I don't know how you felt, but it was so grating to me to watch this. And it was like, yeah, Jar Jar Binks is terrible. This is just awful. What did you think?
I have in my notes that Jar Jar Binks was a big swing, and I'm not mad at it. It was just a big miss.
It was.
Like,
And
I feel bad because we can say both the guy who played Jar Jar Binks and the kid who played young Anakin got such negative reception after the movie. Like,
it affected
both of them had like real issues.
Yeah, it affected
like the guy who played Jar Jar Binks was like suicidal for a little bit because the like fan response he got. The kid like had to like drop out of acting and distance himself because he was getting bullied at school. And like those things are
we're not,
over the top ridiculous. It makes me not even want to criticize it because I'm like, man, that's so bad.
Absolutely, and we're not.
Neither one was good. But
They weren't. But just a little life lesson to all of the fellow movie nerds out there: don't take it so serious that you're causing people emotional harm. But that being said, not to be a hypocrite, but they are both bad in this movie.
Yeah. And you know what? Like, that's okay. They're not the first things to be bad in a movie.
They're not. And honestly, I don't know. Is it Jake Lloyd? Is that the kid actor? I think it is.
That sounds right.
Yeah. And I honestly, in a lot of ways, I don't put a ton of the blame on him. Like, Lucas or somebody should have recognized, like, man, we have written a part, number one, that's not very well written at all. And number two, like, we are asking too much of this kid. Like, he just wasn't up for the challenge. And honestly, most kid actors aren't. Like you talk about greatest kid performances, which we've talked about a little bit. And, those are rare. But like, this poor kid was not up for the challenge, and he is front and center in this movie. So it's really shining a spotlight on the fact that he just wasn't, they gave him more than he was capable of.
So the same year, we've already talked about it, had The Sixth Sense, with maybe the greatest child acting performance of all
I think
time.
We both thought it was.
And it's really not fair to Jake Lloyd. Yeah, like, it's rough for him to have this performance that was not great and then also have the greatest child performance come out at the same time. But even as I say that, I tried to picture watching this, like, what if Haley Joel Osment was cast as young Anakin, and trying to picture him sitting here delivering the lines he had to deliver.
It's bad.
And be like, can I even picture him looking good in this? No, I can't, because you nailed it. It's just a poorly written part.
It's a really poorly written part.
Honestly, it's my biggest gripe about this movie, because my thought was, as I said, I think there's a good story somewhere in here.
Sure.
That they just didn't find. That would be the difference between this movie and a Madam Web. I didn't watch Madam Web and at any point think, there's good pieces here. Right, it was just all bad.
Yeah.
And my number one note in this one is they just really messed up in the way that they presented Anakin.
Mm-hmm.
And my notes was, okay, how would I fix this? First thing I would have done, if I was the script doctor, George Lucas gives me the script and I'm reading through it, I would have made Anakin a little older.
Yeah.
I think that's mistake number one.
Definitely.
Don't start till he's at least like 10 or 12. One, because child actors are harder to find at that age. Mm-hmm. And two, it was just, everything was too much of a stretch.
Yes.
This boy genius who fixes things, the pod racing, it was just like, the movie became so childish because of Anakin's age. And that's something I noticed did happen with each of the prequels, is it kind of did a Harry Potter type thing where the movies, the target demographic fit the age of the character.
Yeah.
So like the early one is for like little kids, and then it matures as the character matures. And this one started off for like, it felt like I was watching a movie for 5-year-olds. That's what Jar Jar Binks felt like. That's what young Anakin felt like, because they started Anakin at that age. So I was like, first note, make Anakin a little bit older.
Absolutely. And I actually just, before I even knew I was going to pick this movie, I saw where Lucas online somewhere in the last month or so was defending this movie, saying like, people didn't get it. This was a kid's movie. And that's fine, but it's still not a good kid's, like, I understand he's trying to defend his movie, but even if you look at it through the lens of this is supposed to be for kids, I still don't think it's a good movie. But yeah, And
No,
the Anakin thing is the number one problem because I already personally didn't want to see Darth Vader's backstory, but if I have to, it has to at least be interesting. And there's just nothing interesting going on here. Nothing with the Anakin character. Like it's just not interesting at all.
yeah. So that's the other thing. It was a kids movie. It matured a lot by the second one, and then no other Star Wars movies feels that like it really is the outlier. It's the most inconsistent with the tone of the
Mm-hmm.
rest of the
It
Star
is.
Wars series. So having a random Star Wars movie just be like this one's going to be the one for kids was unexpected. It doesn't fit, and no wonder people were shocked by it.
Yeah, and it wasn't marketed that way at all. I remember, when I know we'll get to this, but like the previews were leaned really heavily into like Darth Maul and stuff, which gives you the impression that it's just going to be like, just like the other ones. And I went into this, in 1999 thinking like, okay, Darth Maul looks awesome. And I thought he was going to be the Darth Vader of this new trilogy where he was just going to kind of hover over all three movies. So, point being, it wasn't even marketed like a kids movie. It was just marketed as like this is just going to be this is the Star Wars you know and love, and so that's a problem too because it's not the Star Wars, And I don't. I will say this too, just to be clear. I like Star Wars. I don't love Star Wars. I'm not a hardcore nerd, who's like I don't know every single character and ship and weapon and all that stuff.
I'm right there with you. I'm the same way. Like Star Wars, like yeah, I'll see a Star Wars
Yeah,
movie, but I'm not a Star Wars diehard by any
yeah.
means. Yeah.
And you're
So the next thing, yeah,
I was just going to
go
say
on.
really quickly, I'm sorry. You're so right, too, about starting him at a young age because it's immediately off putting. Because if you know anything about Star Wars, that eventually this kid and Natalie Portman's character are going to get together. And it's such a weird choice to start him as such a young, like he's just a small child. So that just is strange as far as like any kind of chemistry between him and Natalie Portman. That doesn't really work at all. You'd have just been better off starting them as teenagers together.
Yeah, either a teenager, or at least closer, because you're right.
Closer.
And Natalie Portman being the same actress all the way through, she doesn't ever look a different age. Like she looks the same throughout,
So that's
and they
weird.
keep trying to age Anakin.
Yeah.
Uh, but so my next notes, Anakin's age was the big thing, but then also just the personality. I think it was really weird trying to make him like this really sweet, kind, nice
Yeah.
boy who we know eventually turns into Anakin. It was just too much throughout the whole prequels. The swing is a little too much and a little too like sudden and abrupt.
It is.
And I know they try to put little pieces, but I'm like, okay, it wouldn't have been that hard to have him be this 12-year-old boy who is brilliant, can fix things, kind of ahead of the curve as far as that goes. Uh, have him be brilliant and fiercely loyal to his mom. Like there's the good, him and his mom are
Mm-hmm.
slaves. But then also have him skeptical of others and authority,
Yeah.
which would make sense for someone who's been living in slavery their whole life.
Right.
And so he's got a little more edge to him. And then it makes sense too, like when they bring him before the Jedi Council and they're like, "You're too old, and we're sensing you've already got some darkness in you."
Right.
It didn't make any sense with
Nothing.
the character they wrote because that kid was like so
Sweet.
perfect.
Yeah.
Like bringing a 12-year-old with some angst, and then it makes sense that the Jedi are skeptical of him.
Exactly. This whole prequel trilogy it got off to such a bad start with this movie and it just never recovered from it.
Yeah. So my how to fix it notes. My first one was that change the things about the Anakin character, which I think would have fixed most everything.
Most
in
of
the
the
movie.
problems, yeah.
Yeah, get rid of a lot of Jar Jar Binks.
Mm.
That's the obvious one. Next one that you've already alluded to a little bit. Let Darth Maul do more.
Let Darth
That
Maul
was
cook.
I think what everybody was disappointed at about coming out of this movie is they're like, the best part about the movie was Darth Maul, the incredible lightsaber fight, and there just wasn't enough of that.
I'm going to tell you right now, in 1999 in the theater, I was ticked off when Darth Maul got killed, and not in the way that the movie wants you to be. Like I was legitimately like disappointed and let down by the movie. It was just like, oh, well, okay, like looking backwards, you could tell like I knew like we've talked about it before. You kind of knew in the moment like this is good, right? It's like you kind of had that skepticism. But in my mind, I just kept thinking like, well, at least we got Darth Maul. Like Darth Maul rules. He's awesome. I can't wait to see him in the next because you knew there was going to be, they were open about how there was going to be 2 more movies, and then he dies, and you're just like, well, forget it. Now there's just nothing. and I was ticked off in the moment. And like I said, not in the way you want to be ticked off by a movie.
Yeah, not just the fact that they killed him. His death was really stupid.
It was really
I mean,
stupid.
the fact that not Anakin, Obi-Wan just flips over him and he just watches him flip over him, catch his sword and cut him in half, and you're like, okay, this dude has been really awesome
And then he just stood there
and
like an idiot.
competent. Yeah, and it's like this doesn't make any sense. This is very inconsistent with and it was just poorly written. That's again, George Lucas just needs someone else to be like, George, this can't be how it happens.
Yeah.
Nobody's gonna buy this.
Yeah. Yeah. And I will forever say, anytime a Star Wars conversation comes up, I always, and anyone wants my opinion, it's always that Darth Maul should have been in all three of these prequel movies.
Yeah, because then there never really was a villain comparable
Right.
to Darth Maul. They brought in Dooku was the villain of the next one, which is always a silly name.
That's another good example.
The Emperor becomes more and more of a villain, but just there was never anything as good as Maul in the rest of the prequels.
Nothing. That's another good note too, is that someone should have cared enough about George Lucas to tell him that Dooku is a stupid name and it sounds stupid to say out loud.
Yeah, it's way too close to doo-doo.
Yeah,
let's just be honest.
Or you could go Dookie if you wanted to. You have a couple options
it's like
there.
Doo-doo and Dookie
Yeah,
got merged together.
Yeah, bad idea. Now, I don't know if you're going to work this in, but I do want to say not everything about this movie was bad. Because like we've pointed out Darth Maul, and I got to say, rewatching it this week, I loved the sequence, all that battle leading up right until Darth Maul looks like an idiot. That was really cool, I thought. I thought that was well done. I guess I just completely forgot about this. I thought it was awesome when Darth Maul was they were separated by the shield or whatever, and Darth Maul was just kind of pacing back and forth. That was really cool. And that's, again, where I, like you said, like somewhere in here, there was probably a good movie. I'm not against the idea that they made more Star Wars movies. I'm just against the idea that they tried to do an Anakin, / Darth Vader backstory. But that part of the movie was cool, I thought.
So that's another thing I should have mentioned, just why Star Wars movies works. The laser swords, the Force, but also just some really cool, aesthetically pleasing shots and settings.
Yep.
And that was one of them. That's my favorite part of the movie too, is being split up by the beams and just watching each of the different characters' reactions. So you got Darth Maul doing the pacing, like I'm working myself up.
That pacing was awesome.
You got Qui-Gon just like meditates,
Yep.
like sits and closes his eyes. And then you've got Obi-Wan, the younger apprentice, who you can tell is trying to, but he's like torn in between the two. He's like, I should be calm, but I'm kind of anxious and can't wait to get back into this. And that was great.
It was great. And that's the kind of character stuff, like it's not deep, complicated character stuff. That's the kind of stuff that, as much as the Anakin stuff didn't work, all that stuff was working, I felt like. So I think if they would have just, I wish they wouldn't have fallen so in love with the idea of doing a Darth Vader backstory. I just wish they would have been like, yeah, we're just going to go back into the Star Wars universe in a different time period. And, they could have sprinkled in little, they could have been like a cool Easter egg or something if someone just casually mentioned, yeah, that's Anakin Skywalker. And then the hardcore fans would have been like, oh my gosh, that's Darth Vader when he was a kid. But just put all the focus on Anakin Skywalker, especially with George Lucas's writing, it just spelled doom for this movie completely. But the Darth Maul stuff was cool.
I think I would also say, Darth Maul was cool. The whole battle was cool. I was really impressed with Liam Neeson.
He was
great. He did a great job in the movie. Again, I sit there and think like these guys have some really bad dialogue to deliver, and their ability to deliver it with like conviction and like in the character to really just own it. Mm-hmm. Both him and Ewan McGregor did a good job. I actually thought Natalie Portman did a good job too.
I did too.
For what she had to do.
And that makes you think, like I said, if they weren't so concerned with showing you Darth Vader, if I was just in a Star Wars world and Darth Maul was kind of the new Darth Vader of this prequel trilogy, and I was following Natalie Portman and Liam Neeson and Ewan McGregor, I probably would have I would think about this movie like I do like The Force Awakens. Where like I said, I only like Star Wars so much. So Force Awakens is not like my favorite movie or anything, but it's an enjoyable movie. It's well done, I think. And I think I would have felt about this like I did that if it wasn't just so hyper focused on this terribly written Anakin Skywalker character.
I think you nailed it. One question I have for you. I got a fun question for each of these movies. So my question for
Right?
you regarding this movie is: if you were a Jedi, what color lightsaber would you wield?
Man, that's a great question. I, I guess I mean, can I pick one that's already taken?
Yeah,
Because the red looks really cool. Darth Maul's red looks really cool, I think.
yeah, it's hard to beat through. I'm not going to be that creative either. I would go with blue. Blue
Would
is
you?
just my favorite
Yeah.
color, and so I would want a blue lightsaber.
Yeah.
I think I would be really bummed out if I was a Jedi and they gave me a green one. I'd be like, I got the
Yeah,
green
I
one.
don't love the green one.
But
I will say this though, I would just want the traditional lightsaber. I would not want Darth Maul's lightsaber. I would end up cutting myself in half with that thing on accident. There is no way I would be cool enough to have Darth Maul's lightsaber.
no, yeah, me neither.
No.
I'd like to think I could,
I would
but
like to
no.
think so. I just need the traditional lightsaber. I want to throw this in real quickly too, because it's very obvious. You know, you notice this when you rewatch this. I think one thing that hurt this movie too, you know, when Lucas made the original Star Wars in '77, obviously the effects were limited, and I think it was really detrimental to him to have so much CGI at his disposal. And I get it. Like he probably felt like a kid on Christmas having all that CGI for Phantom Menace when he didn't have it for New Hope. But man, it is such a CGI fest. And I just don't think that does the movie a whole lot of favors.
No, and it's very obvious that the CGI was great at the time, but quickly became dated.
Yeah.
And so the place you see it the most is in the battle of the droids and what is Jar Jar Binks' people, the Gungans or something. Just
Yeah.
even the grassy fields they're on just look
rough.
very fake.
It's
it was a
rough.
real struggle. It looks like a cutscene from a video game at that time.
It's bad.
And
it's really bad.
Yeah.
Yep.
I did want to throw out a couple of reviews I got online. I posted on Instagram and Facebook, just wanting people's thoughts. My friend Tyler Kaufman, good old TK, said of this movie, it doesn't deserve as much hate as it gets, but still a trash Star Wars film. And he put a crying, laughing emoji.
That's fair.
And I think that's pretty much what in line with what we've been saying. I think.
Yeah, like I said,
probably didn't deserve to be hated as much as it did, but it's not good.
It's not good. No, it's really not.
And then what I really was hoping to see some of the younger people I know, Silas Wheeler. Silas is I think about to be a sophomore in college. Just simply said underrated.
Okay.
And then Kyson Flume, who is going to be a senior in high school this year, one of my basketball players. Shout out to Kyson. Said it's not the best Star Wars movie, but I like it quite a bit. So I think, like I said, the younger generations have embraced it a little more. But it kind of makes sense. I think thinking back to like when I was a kid embracing the original trilogy. Man, those movies look dated, but it didn't bother me. It just felt like, oh, I'm seeing this cool like relic from a time past. And I wonder if kids these days have the same reaction where they go like, yeah, it looks old and dated, but it's an old movie. Like this is what you would expect.
There probably is a lot of advantage to not having been alive to be there for the disappointment of that movie. You know, they kind of just were able to avoid all that. But yeah, for sure. But when you were there in the moment, you know, that disappointment landed with a loud thud. But it is interesting to hear that some people think it's underrated. Interesting.
Yeah. I do think that it is the worst of the prequels.
Do you?
After rewatching them all?
Yeah.
Again, none of them are going to be on my all-time list or anything like that. But I enjoyed rewatching the prequels. I thought each of the next two were better than the first ones.
Yeah.
Still the same thing where I would have had a lot of notes.
Yeah.
But this one I think was the worst of the prequels.
Yeah. So now that you've been in the Star Wars universe for a little bit, do you want to see more Star Wars? I mean, are you good with what we've got? Like,
I think we're oversaturated now. There's so many shows on Disney Plus too. They've been advertising the new one, the Acolyte, during the NBA playoffs, and every time I see a preview, I'm just like, nope, I have no interest.
They are. I'm glad I'm not a diehard Star Wars fan, honestly, because I would probably be living in constant anxiety with trying to keep up with the amount of Disney Plus Star Wars shows. Like
Yeah.
they are cranking those shows out fast, and I couldn't keep up if I wanted to.
And I think the problem is, I think they've finally gotten to the point where they're getting away from the whole Skywalker lineage.
Mm-hmm.
Like you're saying, they probably should have done in this prequel is just have a whole new story.
Mm-hmm.
It's what I wanted for forever. Is like, let's get away from that lineage. It's Star Wars is a whole universe. We don't have to always stay connected to the same core
Right.
group of people. But they didn't start doing that until like it was too late. I was already out
Yeah.
on like I've seen enough Star Wars stuff.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. I don't watch the Disney Plus shows. You know, I know people love The Mandalorian. I think I watched the first season and I did like it, but I just can't. I can't keep up.
yeah, it does. It always feels, and this is sort of the same way with the Marvel shows. It always feels like they're in service to something else. Like they're
Yep.
never just meant to be a thing on their own.
Yeah.
It's like watch this and enjoy it, but you've got to see it so that it serves
Yeah.
your understanding of the whole world going forward.
Yeah. I can't keep up with Marvel and Star Wars both. And I've been choosing to keep up with Marvel. So,
Yeah, and there's nothing wrong with that.
yeah.
All right. Any final thoughts on Phantom Menace before we move on to our second film of 1999?
No, I think we've summed it up. I mean, just a movie that unfortunately, while it was, you know, an important movie and like we said at the time, the most anticipated movie, it just could not live up to the hype, and they just didn't help themselves either. And you summed it up perfectly, where Lucas just he really should have taken some help on this movie.
Absolutely. I do wonder how long into the future, if ever, before rather than getting new Star Wars stuff, we just started getting people remaking original Star Wars content.
Yeah.
Just saying like we're far enough down the line, let's just remake the originals and the prequels and change them up a little bit. I don't know, because that was my thought. It's like it's been 25 years. Not like movies have never been remade after 25 years.
Oh, yeah.
I don't think they would remake this one.
No.
But as I'm sitting there thinking of the things I would fix, I'd be like, would it surprise me that much if someone just said, I'm going to remake the Phantom Menace and I'm going to try to fix it and not make it so childlike and do all these things people want?
I wouldn't be surprised.
I think
at
people
all.
would actually accept it and go see it.
Maybe we'll get like they can get like David Fincher or someone to do it. Go the complete opposite. Quit.
He would have been the perfect choice for the one where Anakin finally does turn, although he would have shown you him killing the younglings.
Oh yeah, it would have been
no cutaway.
Yeah, it would cut their heads off and they would have shown that.
Oh, what a perfect place to stop and transition.
Yeah, we better stop.
All right, so our second movie for 1999, and we already said it, is The Matrix.
Yeah.
The Matrix was what Phantom Menace was to the box office. The Matrix was to just movies in general. It was a hugely impactful movie for what movies can be and what they can do. It was also a box office success. It was the fourth highest grossing movie of the year, grossing $463 million. But the biggest thing is that this movie was, when I think of The Matrix, what I think of is it came out around the same time that DVDs were becoming popular.
Mm-hmm.
And it was like, I was that nerd who's like, got to get a DVD player and you got to get it so you can get the Matrix DVD. So you can have that clear, cool picture with all the great visuals of the Matrix on DVD. That's what I think of with the Matrix.
Absolutely.
So I saw this movie in theaters.
Me too.
And it's a movie I kind of have a fond memory attached to. Of I was begging my dad for me to go see it in theaters. Again, I was how old would I have been? I would have been 14 when it came out.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I was at the mercy of my dad to take me and pay for it. And my dad said, if you want to go see a movie and I'm going to pay for it, you've got to scrub the siding on one side of our house. Or it's just a small portion of our house. But I had to get out and bucket of water and a sponge, and I was scrubbing siding on the side of this house because I wanted to go see The Matrix. And I did it for several hours, and then I got to go see The Matrix, and I was like, totally worth it.
Yeah.
That was what a great experience that I had. But it was one of those movies we talked about last week with the box office issues, how movies just aren't a part of everyone's conversation anymore.
Mm-hmm.
New movies don't come out and everybody's like, oh, you've got to see this so that you can be part of the conversation. The Matrix was definitely one of those movies.
Oh, yeah.
You got to see it so you can be part of the conversation.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It was, and too, like, to me, when I was watching both of these movies this week, I was kind of thinking how The Matrix, we talked about Phantom Menace probably being the most anticipated movie of all time in 1999. To me, my memory is that The Matrix almost kind of snuck up on everybody. Like, I knew it. I knew there was a movie with Keanu Reeves coming out. I remember watching a couple of previews and thinking, yeah, that looks cool. But then it came out and it just so quickly had universal appeal for every, it just immediately people were like, that movie's awesome. And in a lot of ways, it was kind of like, we knew Star Wars was coming for years. And The Matrix, it felt like kind of quietly snuck up on everybody and really took everybody by surprise.
I think you're right about that. It had a great marketing campaign
Right.
because it didn't give too much away.
Mm-hmm.
As we complain about previews all the time now.
Yeah.
It does the whole like what is the Matrix thing,
Yeah.
and then it shows you some cool visuals and has people just going like, yeah, what is this thing?
Yeah.
Like I'm intrigued. It looks really cool, but I
we
don't
didn't
know what it
know.
is.
Yeah. We didn't know
So
everything about it.
so it was one of those things like you had to go see so you could find out,
Mm-hmm.
and that's why I think it to be part of the conversation. Like, and this was again before spoilers, before the internet thing,
Yep.
so it had almost a little bit of that Sixth Sense thing. Like you would see the Matrix, and people would be like, "Oh, it's awesome. What is it?" You'd be like, "You just got to see it. I can't like explain it to you. I don't want to ruin it for you.
Yep.
You just need to experience it for yourself."
Well, yeah, definitely. And it had the advantage of like it is a hard movie to explain. Even if you wanted to explain it to somebody, it's hard. It truly is like when you say like you just have to see it, that The Matrix fits that description so well. Because if I was trying to explain it to you and be like, dude, you don't understand like the action in this movie, you've never seen anything like it, okay, yeah, sure. But truly, you had never seen anything like it. And I'll go ahead and just say that was my biggest takeaway from rewatching The Matrix this week. I was thinking, even as I was walking over here to do this with you, even the movies that we love or that I love or that you love, most movies are not breaking new ground. Most movies are just taking what's come before them and putting a new twist on it or finding a different way to look at it or, something like that. It's not often a movie comes out and is revolutionary like The Matrix was with its action. And when I'd say like I can't explain to you how blown away we were when Keanu Reeves does the lean back thing that got ripped off and parodied a
Yeah,
million times.
bullet time. That's what they called it.
Yeah, that was so mind blowing in the moment. It was unbelievable.
I have always said I credit this movie as much as any other movie for the takeoff of superhero movies because
Yeah.
even though this wasn't specifically a superhero
It
movie,
basically is.
the action was like superhero style and showing people like, oh, you can do things like have people defying gravity and dodging bullets and doing cool stuff like that, and people will be into it.
Yeah. I just can't yeah, exactly. And I can't overstate enough how you had just never seen anything like that. I kind of remember at the time thinking like, because a few years prior to that, we had when we've talked about this a lot, like Terminator 2 in 91 and Jurassic Park in 93. And I think even something like Titanic in 97, you take those three movies. And I remember in the moment thinking like, well, now because of these movies, I've seen it all. Like, who would have ever thought they could do what they did in Terminator 2? Who would have ever thought you could have dinosaurs up on the screen? And whoever would have thought you could recreate the Titanic? So I was like, well, we've seen it all. And then The Matrix came out and it was like, nope, I hadn't seen it all. Here's this whole new set of things that you can do in movies, and it's unbelievable and it blows your mind. And it honestly too, like watching it this week, it was like, yeah, still looks awesome.
It has a great aesthetic.
It does.
For sure. Just like with Star Wars, it's got things that inherit in it that are inherently cool.
Yep.
It, the gravity defying stuff, the moving faster than the speed of light. I think one thing everybody was instantly like, I wish that was real, is the ability to upload information into your mind like a computer.
Yep.
Be like, oh, you can just put in a combat training program and then suddenly I can learn how to fight. And then you start going like, well, if I was in the Matrix, what would I be uploading? I'd learn how to play guitar, just upload it into my head. I'd learn how to, do all sorts of cool stuff. Like that's just such a great concept for people to be like, yeah, I'm in on that.
Yep. Absolutely.
It's really, really cool. So this is one that I think rewatching all four installments in the Matrix universe really helped me understand why I think the first one is a classic and the rest are not. They're
Right.
something separate. The comparisons between them. So this first one, as complex as it feels, this whole idea of the Matrix, this virtual reality people are hooked up to and living in. Like you said, it's a hard movie to explain, but at its core, it's a lot simpler than I remember.
Mm-hmm.
It takes place over less time and involves less events. Like it really, it moves quickly, but it does not spend any point in time. There's no point in time in the first one where I'm going like, man, we're spending a lot of time on this.
Yeah.
Like it moves along. Like by the time they get Neo out, they're like, upload you some combat training, do a little practice, go see the Oracle. You're in the action. We're at the climax. Like it really just boom, boom,
Yep.
boom, boom. It moves, and I was like, man, I remember this feeling like a much bigger and grander story. And I was like, it's doing the thing we talk about all the time: smaller setting, fewer characters, larger
Yep.
stakes. And that's what the sequels got wrong. They kept trying to expand out the
Oh,
world, and it got too much. It just got lost in the details and the weeds.
It got completely
and
lost
like,
in the weeds.
yeah.
Absolutely.
And then the other thing is, it was amazing watching Matrix Resurrections. That's the one that came out a few years ago.
I've never seen that.
It's to me kind of a perfectly fun like little throwaway movie, but it really shows the change in style. I don't think it's just because it's the fourth movie and they kind of knew like we completed a story, and to come back in here we've got to be a little more playful with it.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's just the way movies are made now, where it did a couple things. Well, let me just put it this way: the original one, I think, was able to take itself very seriously,
Mm-hmm.
and movies have a really hard time taking themselves very seriously now.
Yeah.
So the new one was very meta. It was very like jokey. It was much more colorful, and it had a totally different tone. In part, I think, because like I said, it's a fourth one that's kind of reinventing it. So like, how can we do this and not mess it up? We'll make it very wink, wink, and
Mm-hmm.
that sort of thing. But it's also just what movies do now. And I was like, I really appreciate that the original Matrix took itself very seriously.
Yeah. This is the same conversation we had after we watched Terminator 2, where we were like, man, these people in this movie and Cameron and everybody, they are treating this movie 100% seriously. Exact same conversation we had. And and I've never, like I said, I've never seen the fourth Matrix movie. By the time that came out, I had such bad Matrix taste in my mouth from 2 and 3 that I never got around to seeing it.
Yeah. I will say, rewatching those, they're not great. I think that they're probably better than the reputation.
Okay.
And I think in large part, again, victims of expectations. When the first Matrix came out, and everybody was like, it's
Everybody
an A+,
loved
it's
it,
here. Yeah. Everyone's so excited. It was always going to be really hard
To follow that.
to follow it up. And in large part because I think The Matrix is a classic example of a story that the most compelling thing is the unknown and the questions in it. So the more you hash it out and give answers,
The less satisfying.
it's always going to disappoint.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I always point back to the TV show Lost. And the show Lost, I watched like half of the first season, and I was in. I was like, this is amazing. It's compelling. There's like really weird questions you got to know the answer to. And then it just struck me.
I don't want it.
As a freshman in college, I was like, there's no possible answer that's going to satisfy the things that they brought up. This is a lose-lose situation. Like, they can't go anywhere with this.
And you were
exactly
sure enough, right.
So I stopped watching. And when people concluded, and they're like, it was kind of dumb when it ended and they explained it. And I'm like, well, yeah, there was never going to be an answer that was going to be as good as the question.
Right.
And that's kind of the problem with The Matrix. The Matrix, they answered just enough in the first one.
Yeah.
But there was still a lot of mystery. And the more they tried to unpack and unravel that mystery while keeping it like really smart and clever, it's what we talked about. It just gets too muddled and messy. Yeah. And it's never going to be as satisfying as the unknown. You know, when the first one ends and Neo's dialogue or his little monologue at the end is, I didn't come here to tell you how it's going to end, but I'll tell you how it's going to begin. And then he flies off. You're like, holy crap, what's going to be possible? What could happen? You don't actually need to know.
Right.
Because what you're imagining is always going to be more, the curiosity is always more interesting than the payoff.
And I got to say, and I guess this is probably my fault, but like watching this week, I did watch it with a little bit of, I don't know what the right word is, not disappointment, but just a little bit of a sour taste in my mouth, knowing that they kept making more Matrix movie. I guess I was trying to say is like I just watched it, wishing so badly they only did the one Matrix movie.
And that's one of my all-time what ifs in movie history is just what would people think of the Matrix now if there were no
Yeah.
sequels? I think it would still be considered like an all-time classic because it's still. I mean, I think if you ask people what do you think of the Matrix, you kind of get an and you go, no, no, no. What do you think about just the first Matrix?
Hmm.
They're like, oh, the first Matrix was really good.
Yeah.
So if you took those out, would it still just be like if we said, what do you think of the Matrix? People like awesome
Awesome.
movie, all timer. Or I do wonder this watching it: was it always going to be a little bit of a product of its time? Because even though the effects haven't aged poorly, there's some aging to it, and there's just the reality of like I said, it opened the door for a lot of superhero stuff. If you're a kid that goes back and watches The Matrix now, you're not going to be blown away by what you see because you've seen years of Marvel movies
Right.
doing all sorts of really crazy stuff.
Right.
It also has very much that end of the 90s, turn of the century aesthetic, like
Oh, it does.
black, the black,
Oh
the
yeah.
kind of it's kind of goth
Little
look.
goth. Yep.
That I was saying, like the basic Resurrections had to bring in a lot more color because I think that like dark goth look
Was of the time.
just it was of the time. Even the music was of the time
Very of the
that they
time.
play in it. And so I'm like, I never thought of it when it came out of being like, man, this is a movie that's very of its time. It felt very like timeless the way it was done. There
Yeah.
are elements, but there are elements that are very of its time. So I always wondered maybe this movie was always destined to age kind of strangely, and it makes me wonder what young people would think going back to watch it. Have your kids seen The Matrix? I'm curious.
I don't think they have, but I think they would know certain clips of it, but I don't know if they've ever sat down and watched The Matrix. I've never watched it with them. Um, yeah, that's a really good point. I ought to have them watch it. I should have thought about that this week. I will always land on the side though of like I would rather people be saying like, man, I wish they would have made more Matrix movies than have people going, man, those Matrix movies they did, those other Matrix movies they made were just not very good. Just
Yeah, always leave them
leave them
wanting
wanting
more, not
more.
less.
Yeah, leave them wanting more, not wishing there was less out there.
Yeah. The one of the great casting trivia things, what ifs, is that they originally wanted
Will
Will Smith
Smith.
to play Neo. I've always thought they lucked out getting Keanu Reeves because I thought this is just a perfect Keanu Reeves part.
It
He's
is.
the right amount of sort of like spacey and out there, but cool
Oh yeah, he's
to play the character that he needs to play here. Will Smith is a little too like quippy and self-aware and everything to have played a character like Neo who feels so disconnected in the Matrix, the fake world, and then takes on this whatever Messiah personality that you want to say the one has
yeah. I think
in this one. But
Will Smith would have been too Will Smith for the part. But I think I'm pretty sure he's on record saying like, yeah, that was a terrible decision, especially when you factor in that he turned this movie down to do Wild Wild West, which is just an
yeah,
all-time terrible movie.
I do. I mean, like I could get someone reading the script for The Matrix and being like, I just don't get it.
Yeah.
Because I imagine it's a hard one on paper to be like, what is happening? I'm
Oh,
not following what's happening.
definitely. And that's the great thing, like you said, the great part about Keanu, because Keanu, like whatever you think of him, he does always have that little bit of like, this guy's weird, and so it like feels like you need to be a little bit weird to want to have done this movie, because when you're just reading a script, obviously you don't know how it's going to turn out. You don't know, they can write what seem like cool visuals all they want, but until you see it up on screen, you don't know that it's actually going to be cool. So I think Keanu was perfect for this. Actually, rewatching it, I just thought, I was thinking like you don't think of something like The Matrix and great acting necessarily, but everybody in this movie knows exactly how to play their part, and they do it to perfection. I thought
They do. Lawrence Fishburne is
he's
great
so
as
good. He's
Morpheus.
great.
It's one of those performances I think was so good it kind of messed up his career
Yeah,
because
because
he
that's
just
just who
became
he is.
synonymous with Morpheus.
And if he's in a
And
movie
then
not doing that very, slow, direct talk, you're like, well, this isn't. Yeah, that's just what you think he is from that point on.
and then Hugo Weaving that plays Agent Smith.
Awesome.
He's just great. It's a great villain because talk about not looking like your traditional villain.
Yeah.
Like they were like, we're really going to get to the most plain, everyday looking guy. He's going to wear the most plain suit. He, he's going to talk very as dry as possible,
and it works.
But somehow it's just going to work.
It does work, and it's so satisfying. Like they do a great job. Again, you don't necessarily think of like the Matrix and great villains necessarily. I think you typically think of the visuals, but they do such a great job. It's so satisfying when Carrie-Anne Moss, who is also really good in the movie, has the gun up to him and says, "Dodge this," and she just blasts him. I remember in 1999 in the theater that got like a "oh yeah" from people. Like that got an audible reaction from people, and it was still satisfying to watch this week.
Yeah, I remember the same reaction in my theater.
Yeah,
that was
so. I
like
mean,
not a literal applause moment, but an applause moment.
And that's not going to happen if the villain isn't doing a good job as being a villain. So, yeah, that was the thing to me. Like I was like, you know what? They nailed the casting in this movie, and the people they did cast, they nailed what they needed to do in this movie. They delivered.
Absolutely. It's a, one of my notes was just it's a smart movie.
Yep.
It's really, really well written. Like the dialogue in this movie, it's a lot of exposition, and somehow they do it in a way that doesn't feel like I'm just getting an exposition dump all the time.
Yep.
But they've got to do a lot because they're just trying to like help you as a viewer
understand this
the
world
that they're drawing you into, and they do it in a lot of really great creative ways.
Yep, they do a really good job.
Here's my my fun question for you for this one, and this one might be hard. I spent way too much time thinking about this one when I thought of the question. If you were in the Matrix as one of these freed people, one of the hackers that get out, what would your name be? The Neo to the Thomas Anderson, the Trinity, Morpheus. They all have cool code names. What would your name be?
You are really putting me on the spot here.
I'll let you think about it for a second. I'll throw out some of the names that I wrote down. I was like, you could stick with. There was a lot of like biblical allegories. Like maybe I could just go something like Job.
Yeah,
I've always thought Job was a cool name. I thought Doc, like Doc Holliday. Just thinking of favorite movie characters. Yeah. Cup, which is actually from the Transformers, the Transformers, the movie that I loved as a kid. Yeah. One of the characters' name is Cup, and I always thought that was cool. Right on. And I was like, you know what? There's a lot of like, sort of electronic or digital era references, and I was like, I probably wouldn't be the cool character that I'd want to be. My name would probably be something like Spellcheck.
Right.
Or I'd be the nerdy character. Morpheus would be like, this here's Grammarly.
Yeah.
Nobody likes him very much.
He's not that. He's not that cool. Don't hang out with him. Yeah.
Yeah.
Man, I think I don't know what I've got in mind necessarily, but I think what I would want is not like a descriptive name. Like I like the idea of like just a short. I love Neo. Like the idea of Neo. Yeah. So I would go with something. Maybe I could be like Theo or something like Neo's brother Theo.
I love that so much. I thought you could just steal from like Jaws. You could be like Quint or something like that.
That's what. Honestly, I was thinking about that. I would probably just steal from something I already knew, or I would be like Barrel or something, like representing like the yellow barrels in Jaws, or like Harpoon. I would be Harpoon. Maybe that would be what I would be.
There you go.
I'm like you. They would be like, I don't know, just call this guy nerd. They just call him just call him dork. Be like, oh man, even in the Matrix, I still wouldn't be cool.
Right. I remember having that realization watching X-Men movies one time, and I was like, everyone's like, oh, it'd be so cool if X-Men were real and we were like mutants and had powers. I was like, odds are if X-Men were real, I wouldn't be a mutant, or if I was, I'd be like Toad.
Yeah.
Like, ugh,
Toad?
Great. I'm a frog-like person, not something cool like Wolverine.
And I know,
Toad.
And I guarantee you, I would either get like they would have run out of cool trench coats, so they would give me like a jean jacket or something, or I would wear the trench coat and I would just look like such a tool in it that they would immediately be like, no, give that back. They would take it from me.
That's something that we have to mention with the movie. The
Matrix.
We do. It inspired all sorts of people to want to steal the aesthetic of the Matrix. You watch and you go like, that is awesome. The trench
The
coat, the sunglasses,
glasses.
and then you realize if you actually go out in the real world dressed in that all black with a trench
You
coat,
look like a serial
you look
killer.
like a psychopath.
Oh, yeah.
You do. Yeah.
Yeah.
And of course, then it had ties into the whole Columbine shooting thing.
That
Stuff,
gets a
which I
little
don't want
rough.
to get into,
No.
but I think the movie that parodied this the best was, I don't know if you ever saw the movie Grandma's Boy.
Yes.
But
with Adam Sandler's buddy.
That
Yeah.
one, yeah, and then the head like genius young programmer in that clearly is like inspired by the Matrix, and he's wearing like all black Matrix style stuff, the hair slicked back, and just looks like an idiot. And it's like, oh yeah, that's exactly what I would look like if I tried to pull off this aesthetic in real life.
I would look terrible, and my glasses would just fall off right in the middle of battle. It would be terrible. It's you also have to mention too, like, and we've touched on it, but this movie almost like it so quickly people started parodying this movie. Like it had really deep, like it really dug its roots into pulp culture because people were ripping it off and making fun of it, but like not in a mean way, but like it's, I remember in one of like the scary movies, like the Anna Faris character, she did like the bullet dodge thing, and it really quickly, became a thing to like mimic the Matrix.
Yeah, there's a lot of movies that mimic that bullet time thing. I mean, even Kung Pao,
yeah.
Enter the Fist, did it with a cow shooting milk at him doing the bullet time dodge. It wasn't this movie, but The Matrix Reloaded had a really great MTV Movie Awards parody.
Yes. Yep.
And Will Ferrell playing the architect.
Yes, he did.
Still one of my favorite movie parodies I've ever seen.
It's really funny.
It's so funny.
Another thing too, I just want to bring up real quickly while I was watching this week, I just kept thinking like, there's just not stuff like this right now. Like it's definitely worth mentioning that the Matrix was original material. It wasn't based off of anything, right? Like it's original, and it's so creative, and they took such risk, and like you said, even their style and their look, and it's like, we're gonna slap everyone in a trench coat and sunglasses, and we're just gonna hope that they look really cool. And I just don't know if movies take this chance, or what I kept thinking while I was watching it was like, now when people try to create some world or universe and a new original look, you end up with Rebel Moon, which we both agree was just complete garbage. But it's like, and this comes up a lot on our podcast, where it's like, there's just not stuff like this right now. People willing to take a big chance, and then the audience accepting that and going to see it and making the movie a huge hit. I really fear that a movie like The Matrix would not work right now.
You're probably right. It is remarkable that there haven't been many movies that I even felt like tried to duplicate what it did. There was a few that came out that felt kind of like
little
to be
Matrixy.
There was a movie called Equilibrium with Christian Bale early in his career that was it. I think even in like on the box said something about like, comparing it to the Matrix, but I guess it's just a really hard story to mimic without, I mean, like, how do you do something adjacent to it but not exactly the same thing, so it'd be really hard to do, I think, which is the one thing where I guess why it was always destined to have sequels is there felt like a lot more you could do in this world, even though we didn't really need it, which is probably what they needed to do, was explore smaller stories in the world and not try to build out the whole thing. But wanted to read a couple of reviews again for this one. People who gave feedback. Again, Tyler Kaufman was the only one who gave me a review of both. He said, making leather cool before vampires did.
Nice.
Which I was like, when did vampires make leather cool? I guess the Underworld movies for sure.
Probably,
kind of had a Matrixy aesthetic to them.
That's true.
And then that I kind of laughed because I thought he thought the same thing I did. Like, it made a certain style seem really cool.
Yeah.
That nobody ever really actually could pull off in real life.
No.
My friend Scarlett Yancey said, I think it's one of the most creative movies. I still love it after watching it for 25 years. I was really glad to hear Scarlett say that, because I think
I am too.
A lot of people have kind of lost this movie to time because of the sequels, or because they just forget about it.
Mm-hmm.
And it's nice to hear people like still enjoying this movie.
I agree completely. And creative is a great word to use when describing this movie.
Yeah. And then last one was Natalie Helmuth. Natalie said, "Pretty sure it's a parody, but I like the throat chop fighting moves." And I gotta be honest, Natalie, I don't even know what you're talking about.
Right?
There's some creative fighting. There you probably did see plenty of parodies
I'm
of it, like
sure.
we talked
Oh,
about.
I'm sure.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. The only
Um,
reason I didn't comment is because I didn't want to give away what I was going to say about these movies. Any other time I would comment on your stuff.
Absolutely. Yeah, I am shocked more people won't reply. Uh, I assume most people have seen these movies that we're talking about, especially these movies.
Hmm.
I don't know. If I come across people asking what I think about movies, I know again I'm a movie nerd. I'm definitely going to
Oh
reply
my
and say
gosh, I
something.
love it
But
when you post stuff that I can reply to. I just didn't, like I said, just
yeah,
didn't want to these particular movies because we were going to talk about them.
yeah. So come on, people, do your part.
Reply, 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 reply.
Give us some feedback.
Yeah,
We like to share what other people think. We don't want this podcast to be just about what we think.
absolutely,
Obviously that's a lot of it's going to be, but we also say this: we're for the people. We want the people's voices to be heard
absolutely.
as well.
And like I said, I got to say, I did, even though what we found out was that we still didn't like Star Wars Episode One. I did really enjoy going back to watch two movies that I had not sat down in one sitting and watched all the way through in a really long time.
I agree 100%.
Yeah, I had a good
I will
time doing it.
say, as we look going forward, so we're right about halfway through our 1999 movie rewatches. There's still plenty of movies to pick and plenty of movies I'm interested in, but they become less and less obvious. I think we've gotten a lot of the big obvious
We've gotten the big
choices
ones, I think, out
out
of
of
the
the
way.
way, and so we might be getting a little more obscure with our picks going in the future, but still a lot of good ones to revisit.
I think I've already got my next one picked out.
Ooh, I'll be curious to hear. I do not. I need to go work on picking out what my next one will be.
Yeah.
For next week, though, we are going to have one or two new movies
Yeah.
to discuss.
Yep.
Next weekend, Kinds of Kindness and The Bike Riders comes out in theaters.
Yeah.
And we've talked about we're either going to do one or both if we can get to both of those movies to discuss a couple of new movies coming out. So we're excited about that because it's been a minute since we've had some new movies to talk about.
I know for a fact I'm seeing Bike Riders. I'm seeing that on Friday. My plan is to get up on Saturday and squeeze in Kinds of Kindness, which, is probably going to be just a super normal, not weird at all movie coming off of, the guy's first movie since directing Poor Things, which also just super normal, good movie for everybody. So I expect Kinds of Kindness will just be, just super normal.
Absolutely.
And
yeah, Yorgos is known for being very straightforward.
very straightforward. Yeah, for sure. Listen, when you have got to squeeze in some time, we've got to have the In a Violent Nature conversation sometime.
Well, 100%. I'm thinking the week after that. I don't think there's anything big coming out the week after that. I thought would probably just be a month of June recap. The things that we haven't had a chance to talk about. And we'll definitely have an In a Violent Nature conversation.
I can't wait
that week.
Listen, you're the boss, so I'm not trying to tell you what to do, but I'm just dying to talk to you about that movie.
And we'll get to it. I promise.
I trust you completely.
All right. Well, thank you everybody for joining us for another week revisiting 1999. We look forward to seeing you guys next week. Hopefully, you guys see the Bike Riders and Kinds of Kindness, just because again, we want people going to see movies like we do.
Go
and being
to the
part
movies.
Of the conversation. Yeah, if you go see it before we record next Sunday,
let us know.
Let us know. Yeah, give us some feedback, and we'll share your feedback on the pod.
Absolutely. Can't wait to talk about some new movies next week.
Absolutely. We will see you guys next week.
Yep.